Hello, Andrea Morset-Grazzini, founder and CEO of WetheP. Welcome. Today we're going to have a very important discussion around civic engagement with an unlikely and perhaps unexpected change agent, Jim Keenan. Jim Keenan grew up in Apple Valley, Minnesota. And full disclosure, I know Jim from growing up in Burnsville, Minnesota, an adjacent community. He's going to share with us how he came into civic engagement in the most unlikely and most difficult of possible ways. Thanks for coming, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
So, give me a little bit of background on how you came into civic engagement. I know that, and maybe you didn't even consider it civic engagement, but we do. It clearly is. So what happened?
I didn't consider it civic engagement. Sure, I have since. I came into trying to get my message out through a lawsuit that I started with the Catholic Church after having been a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of a priest.
Okay, tell me where, I know of course where, but share with us where and approximately when this all happened.
It was at Church of the Risen Savior. Mm-hmm. It was in the early 80s, 1980, 81-ish.
And this is Burnsville, Minnesota?
This is in Burnsville, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. My family was members of the parish. Mm-hmm. In fact, my family was, I think, one of the first families to start the parish. My brother and I were two of the very first altar boys when the church used to use the elementary school cafeteria as their sanctuary. And my older brother and I also were the altar boys for the very first Mass of consecration at the church. So it was the church was a big deal at our house. My dad was always an usher. That's where your mom and my mom became very close friends, and it was our complete, and I would say outside of our neighbors on either side of us, it was our total social situation. So.
And your family with all those boys was well known. I remember where you sat in the church. I remember your parents, and your parents are still active in that same church, right?
Very much so.
Great.
Very much so. My mom was the first female to give a sermon at the pulpit. Which was a big deal for her, you know, and a special moment in her life. I didn't attend for obvious reasons.
This was when you were an adult?
Yes.
Okay.
It was just a couple years ago. Years ago. So through my journey of this long lawsuit that went all the way to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and we ended up losing on a split vote based on statute of limitations. I think when that happened, I became more engaged.
Let's dig into that, and I want to hear more about how you became engaged, but I want to just do a little chronology. So when did you decide to go to do the lawsuit?
Right around 2003.
Okay.
I first met with Jeff Anderson, and my case was somewhat unique in that I really didn't have vivid memories of the abuse until an adult age, and my wife and I were outside one summer afternoon, and I should preface it, I met my wife in grade 9, and so she knew me very well, and I met her just after the abuse stopped.
Okay.
And so she knew me as kind of that adolescent boy who was, you know, goofy and you know, tried machismo and tried all the sports and, you know, and just searching for himself. So she knew a lot about me. And she would describe blue funks that I would get into, especially around summertime. And that's the time of year the abuse took place. And one day it just started coming out, and she called my mom and dad, and my mom said to me, are you having memories or flashbacks, because she knew I had spent a lot of time with Father Tom.
And by this time, he'd already been in the news several years prior.
Yes.
We already knew that he was had abused numerous children in that parish and others.
Yes, I was told that I'm somewhere in the neighborhood of the 33rd, 34th victim.
Out of
however many there may be to come forward.
So. Did your parents have any inkling that this was happening when you were children?
In talking to my mama afterwards, you know, in armchair quarterbacking, anything is you know, you can really put the dots together. But she kind of, as a mom, I think had a sense something wasn't right with things. And the day that I told her, and then the days after that, when we had numerous talks, and the dots were put together, she kind of went, I see how the whole grooming process took place, and and how he's an incredibly likable person.
I remember him.
And when you come from the family I came from, talk about kind of a feather in the cap and a little bit of a, hey,
good Catholic
look
boy,
at that.
right?
My kid gets to go golfing with the priest, and my kid gets to go to the racket club with the priest, and he's not out doing negativity. He's hanging with the priest, and in fact, in our house, one of the mainstay rules, if you were going out with friends, were if you couldn't do it with the priest, that's not an activity you should be doing.
Oh dear, oh
I know,
dear.
isn't that
so
ironic?
he was endorsed around as he would be, as a priest would be for many of us Catholic children.
Oh yeah, it was quite a mark of honor, I think, for my mom and dad.
So how hard was it for you to process this with your mom years later?
Oh geez, I don't know that we're done, to be honest.
Well, we'll talk about that more later, because that's a
definitely.
pretty emotional topic, and I think it's really critical because when we're dealing with civic engagement, we're often dealing with highly personal issues, and and how do we address those? And I think you've got really valuable things to add to that, and maybe even how complex and how hard and how long it takes to address it.
Definitely.
But for now, let's go back then. Let's go back. So you came many years later. This started occurring to you that something was going on. What was your first, other than telling your wife and calling your mother, then what? I mean, how long did it take you to decide that you wanted to go to do so much as the lawsuit?
It was probably close to 2 years from the time that I had the idea solidified that yes, these events happened, to when I went to a lawyer. And really the reason I went to a lawyer was the Catholic Church all but shut me out.
Okay, so tell me about what you tried before you went to a lawyer.
My wife and I at the time were very involved at St. Michael's Parish in Prior Lake, and involved in that we were faithful attendees. We taught religion classes. It was still very much our path, if you will. And so the first thing I did was call Father Rick, and multiple days later, countless phone calls on my end. I remember leaving distraught phone calls where he probably didn't understand what I was saying.
Because you were so shook up.
I was sobbing. And then meeting with him and basically getting a no response.
So first of all, he didn't respond real immediately.
No.
And what do you make of that?
I think he had, personally, my sense is that he probably already had a list or a procedure that he had to call somebody higher than him and get guidance.
Makes sense, makes sense. And then when you met with him, that had to be pretty frustrating because he wasn't able to or willing to give you any feedback whatsoever.
There was
no advice, no.
I'm sorry, oh my gosh, this is horrible, let's get the ball rolling on fixing these things. There was none of that. It was very cold and kind of, okay. I remember leaving just feeling like, now who do I go to?
Did that set you back at all?
I think at that point I was still kind of reeling. This was probably 2-3 days after the first memory.
Okay.
I remember saying to Father Rick, I hope my goal is to work all through this and then be a parishioner who can kind of talk to the people and say, yep, these things happened and here's why some good has come out of it.
So you were already, although you didn't call it that, your primary motivation at that time was to take this really difficult situation that you'd endured, that you'd suffered, and turn it into a way to help others heal and grow, right? Very soon.
Yep.
Okay.
I think so.
So Father Rick gave you little to go on, and then where to from there?
Then I called the priest who married Steph and I, Father Griffin.
This is
Father Pat, and he was down at St. Stephen's down in the city, and I got an appointment to see him and went into his office, and he's the guy who baptized my boy. He married my wife and I. He was very close with my parents.
Very nice man.
Very nice man. And outside of a phone number for a administrative assistant at the district or the diocese, that was about it. I remember he put his hand on my shoulder and kind of gave me some condolences, but there was nothing that you would think you would get from somebody who was in that role.
A counselor and
yeah,
right, and a healer,
no
sort of.
sense of empathy or, you know, I'm so sorry. The thing that was in my head was I wasn't getting told that anyone was sorry. And that started to kind of be something. It was like I started to see that this entity wasn't about acceptance or anything. And I can honestly say since that day, I've not heard from Father Pat one time.
Oh dear, and that's
or
heartbreaking.
Anyone from very heartbreaking, very heartbreaking. And I've seen him close up in public, as close as you and I are, without a word.
I know Father Pat well. He is a very nice man, and this is what complicates us all. There are very nice priests and leaders of the church that are, whether they like it or not, are wrapped up in all of this.
Right. And I just had to believe in my heart that somehow he was given marching orders. You know, it didn't, what I knew of him, and really Father Rick too at the time, their action towards me after knowing didn't necessarily parallel what I had known of them before.
So suddenly they sort of changed. This
Right.
wasn't what you knew them as, you know, their natural operating.
No, there was a new interaction style with
Right.
Jim Keenan.
Right, specifically, not necessally with others.
Not, well, I couldn't speak to that, but like to how I was treated
Sure.
and kind of my wife on the side, I would say it was a little different. And then at that point you start to realize, okay, I'm not going to get support from the entity that allowed the abuse to happen in the first place.
Did you try to go to the Archdiocese at all?
I went there and to meet with a lady, and she basically gave me the name of 3 or 4 therapists that I could contact. And
Here in Minnesota or elsewhere?
Here in Minnesota. And based on, I'm assuming, past lawsuits, there was some provisions that they needed to pay for ongoing therapy of any victims.
So they offered to pay for therapy?
Yep, and I went.
Okay. And so did you find that useful, and did they cover all the costs of therapy, and how long did you go?
I did find it incredibly useful, and I'm a psychologist by trade.
That's
so
right.
It was a little interesting the first couple sessions because I argued about diagnosis and things like that. You know, and it was
little
just
professional.
it was almost that I want to be here, I really want to be here, but I don't want to engage in what I know I'm going to have to engage in.
Right.
And so I diverted, but it was incredibly helpful. They paid for a lot of it. They stopped paying for it at one point, and my attorney. I went pretty solid for about 9-10 months, and that's 3-4 times a week. And then I went kind of weaned off, was out of it for a while, went back, all told over the course of about 3 years.
And so what was the net effect of the therapy? You're a therapist, you believe in it. In fact, Jim has a firm where he is the principal and the lead of 50-some therapists. So this is very much your passion and your profession. So tell me, how did you can just
what it did for me is it when trauma happens, I think what the psyche kind of holds it out here because it's afraid, and the self is in that fight or flight against it all the time. And what I was able to do was integrate it and make it a part of me. When all of these memories were very fresh, if I saw a priest or people started talking about it, I could easily find myself in tears. And it would just kind of be this rush of emotion, almost kind of like, here we are, you got to deal.
So you you had the wherewithal to let yourself have these feelings rather than deny them, which is our common practice.
Exactly.
And you had a lot of catching up to do in a sense, because in fact you had been denying them, whether you knew it or not. I mean, as we do,
and
we
I had
repress.
to rewrite some rules that I was living by internally. I had to address some immaturities, I think, that had occurred at the time of abuse that I just kind of deemed as uniquenesses to me.
Right. Can you explain those?
I think in terms of relationship being very I didn't go a lot of places alone. With my kids, I never let them go to any place alone, bathrooms. I was very overprotective. I always found myself looking, where are the exit? who doesn't seem right.
So there was something in your subconscious that just had an impulse to be protective.
Yeah, and it was just kind of, on one level, it was kind of a joke with people because they knew if I came to the restaurant, I may be asking
You were the freaky
someone,
dad that was kind of driving
Yep.
your children crazy.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, I am the freaky mom,
Right,
but
right.
yeah.
But you know, yeah. So I had a lot of little quirks, and we used a technique in therapy called EMDR.
Sure.
And what I think that did.
And explain EMDR if you would, just quickly.
EMDR it somehow bridges what I would call gaps between the conscious and the subconscious.
It's a bit of biofeedback in a way.
It's a little bit. It's usually an eye movement over the eyes, and it allows the body to just kind of go and experience the feelings. It's very powerful. But what it did after a number of sessions was allow me to face the abuse and not have it wreck me, and not have it be like I'm driving down the road and I'm crying for no reason. It really started to integrate me with me, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And so then what happened was I was able to start to address all of the other ripple effects that this caused.
Okay.
You know, all of the relationship issues with my bride, parenting issues that I have had with my two sons, things at work. You know, addressing that. You know, looking back over clients that I had and really being able to evaluate. Were you able to go where you needed to go with the client?
So you clicked right into, in a way, you clicked right into your natural healer mode, and you were healing yourself, but also seeing how your experience could improve not only your personal relationships, but also your clients' relationship or your clients' outcome.